The pre-dawn air was cold, sharp, and unforgiving as Captain Elise Morgan stood among her fellow cadets at Fort Bragg. A thin mist clung to the base of the towering pine trees, curling around the boots of soldiers who had been awake for hours, pushing their bodies to the limit. The rhythmic pounding of boots on the gravel training ground echoed like a drumbeat of inevitability, a reminder that this was not a place for the faint of heart. Every cadet felt the weight of expectation. Elise felt it too, but in her case, it carried a different edge. For her, it was the weight of proof, the need to show the world she belonged where men had long dominated. Elise's small-town roots were evident in the way she carried herself. No arrogance, just a quiet, unwavering confidence that radiated from her every movement. Growing up, she had listened to the stories of her father, a decorated veteran, recounting the battles he had fought overseas. "Strength isn't granted," he had told her, voice gravelly with memories of war. "It's earned in sweat, in pain, in the moments when everyone else gives up." Elise had taken those words to heart. They were stitched into the very fabric of her being, shaping her into a soldier who would not yield to adversity. She glanced at the cadets around her. Many of them towered over her, their muscular frames intimidating. Some cast sideways glances, measuring her against their own expectations. Others whispered doubts she couldn't hear, but felt anyway. She could sense it, a subtle undercurrent of skepticism, of surprise that a woman could even hope to match them. But Elise had never been one to shrink in the face of doubt. Every drill, every obstacle, every punishment they handed out, she met it head on. Her presence demanded attention, whether they wanted to give it or not. The day's first exercise was a grueling obstacle course designed to weed out those who lacked endurance and resolve. Cadets crawled through mud pits, scaled walls slick with condensation, and navigated rope bridges swaying over chasms. Elise's body ached from the countless hours of prior training, but her mind was unrelenting. Pain was a language she had learned to understand and translate into fuel. With every climb, every leap, she reminded herself of why she had chosen this path, to prove that determination could surpass brute strength, that courage could defy conventional limitations. During a momentary pause atop one of the course's higher platforms, Elise allowed herself a brief glance at the horizon. The sun had not yet risen, but the sky was tinged with the faintest hues of dawn, a promise of new beginnings. She thought of her father's voice again, a mantra that had carried her through countless challenges. A soldier isn't made by limbs, but by will. It was more than advice. It was a compass, guiding her through the chaos of her training and the ever-present pressure of being judged. Her squad noticed her determination immediately. Unlike others who relied on sheer size or aggression, Elise commanded respect through focus, precision, and an unshakable calm. During a team drill simulating enemy engagement, she directed her squad with clarity and decisiveness. Her voice cut through the shouts and chaos like a blade, each command crisp and unhesitating. Move left, cover the perimeter, eyes on the objective. Even the most seasoned cadets found themselves falling in line, drawn to the unspoken authority she wielded effortlessly. Yet, admiration was mixed with envy. A few cadets couldn't hide their irritation at her consistent performance. To them, she was a constant reminder that merit and skill could outshine raw physical power. Some whispered behind her back, questioning whether she truly belonged, whether her success came from talent or luck. Elise ignored them, as she always had. She had learned early on that distraction was a luxury a soldier could not afford. Every whisper was an opportunity to prove them wrong, every doubt a reason to excel further. As the morning progressed, the drills escalated in intensity. Exhaustion was palpable. Sweat stung eyes, muscles trembled, and lungs burned with every labored breath. Yet, Elise pressed on, driven by something deeper than mere ambition. She was chasing a legacy, not one of medals or recognition, but of self-mastery, of breaking through barriers imposed not by law or regulation, but by perception. Each step she took across the gravel, each climb over a wall, was a defiance of the limitations others assumed she had. Between exercises, cadets fell into ragged clusters, leaning against walls or collapsing onto the cold ground. Elise, however, moved with deliberate purpose. She took note of her squad, observing their fatigue and morale. Leadership was not just about giving orders. It was about reading the battlefield in microcosm, understanding who needed guidance, who required encouragement, and when to push and when to pull back. She was already thinking several steps ahead, anticipating challenges, plotting solutions, a skill that would soon become invaluable. By late morning, the training ground had transformed into a battlefield of bodies and wills. Elise faced the final obstacle, a rope climb over a deep pit where misstep meant not just failure but injury. Her hands gripped the coarse fibers, calluses screaming in protest. Her legs, though smaller than many of her peers, were a powerhouse of control and technique. With a powerful surge, she propelled herself upward, muscles straining, mind laser-focused. At the top, she paused, chest heaving, and glanced down. Below her, the course stretched endlessly, a testament to the relentless challenge of Special Forces training. At that moment, something shifted. The whispers, the envy, the doubts, none of it mattered. Up here, at the apex of her climb, she realized the truth she had always carried. Her strength did not derive from the size of her frame, nor the ease of her movement, but from the unyielding fire in her mind and spirit. This realization was intoxicating, affirming, and terrifying all at once. Elise had proven, at least to herself, that she belonged. But the true test, she did not yet know, was waiting just beyond the horizon. As the sun finally broke over the tree line, casting golden light on the training ground, Elise Morgan descended from the rope. Her squad followed, some inspired, some resentful, all aware that something extraordinary had unfolded in their midst. Elise moved with quiet pride, already anticipating the next challenge. Somewhere deep within, she sensed that her journey, her real test, was only beginning. And though no one could foresee the trials ahead, one thing was certain. She would face them with the same iron will that had brought her to the top of that rope, and, ultimately, the very edge of her destiny. The morning sun had barely risen, but the mountain training range at Fort Bragg was already alive with the low murmur of cadets and the rhythmic pounding of boots against gravel and stone. Elise Morgan's squad had been assigned a mountain extraction. EXERCISE, one of the most grueling tests of endurance, teamwork, and nerve. The goal was deceptively simple: ascend a treacherous incline, secure a simulated hostage, and execute a coordinated extraction, while under the scrutiny of instructors watching every misstep. The stakes were high. Any error could mean failure, humiliation, or worse, injury. Elise moved first, her movements precise and calculated, every step a demonstration of skill and discipline honed over years of training. Her squad followed, some keeping pace, others struggling against the steep incline and icy morning air. The mountain seemed alive with hostility. Jagged rocks jutted from the earth like jagged teeth. Slick with morning dew, an icy wind cut across the cadets' faces. Elise's eyes were sharp, scanning for hazards, adjusting footing, and keeping mental notes of her squad's weaknesses. Her leadership was immediate, instinctive, and undeniable. Halfway up the incline, the exercise took an unexpected turn. A key rope, the main line used to guide and secure cadets as they navigated the final cliffside, suddenly snapped under tension. Elise's hand slipped, and she plummeted downward in an instant. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs as gravity tore her toward jagged rocks below. Her squad froze in disbelief, their instincts frozen by shock. Screams echoed across the mountain as cadets shouted her name, but no one could reach her in time. The fall was brutal, instantaneous, and Elise hit the ground with bone-shattering force. Pain exploded through her legs, white-hot and consuming, a sensation unlike anything she had experienced. Every nerve in her body screamed, yet adrenaline kept her conscious long enough to process the horror. She couldn't move. Panic rose, mingling with fear, but she fought to focus. Her hands scraped the rocks, leaving streaks of blood as she tried to sit up. The sounds of chaos around her were distant, like echoes in a tunnel. Her squad finally rushed to her side, their faces pale with guilt and horror. Their leader, the woman who had inspired and guided them, lay broken and helpless at the foot of the cliff. The instructors arrived moments later, surveying the scene with a mixture of anger, urgency, and disbelief. Elise was in shock, her legs crushed and twisted unnaturally beneath her. The medic shouted instructions, cadets scrambled to follow orders, and a stretcher was brought. Pain racked her body with each movement, but more than the physical agony, it was the helplessness that clawed at her spirit. She had trained for moments like this, scenarios that tested courage and adaptability, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of being incapacitated. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, her mind raced. Memories of her father's words, "A soldier isn't made by limbs, but by will," clashed with the present. Could she still be a soldier if her body refused to cooperate? The thought was unbearable, and yet, even through the haze of pain and blood, she clung to a fragile spark of determination. She was not done, not yet. The helicopter ride to the hospital blurred together, the spinning rotors, the numbness, the murmurs of cadets and medics recounting what had happened. Elise's thoughts wandered through fragments of her life. The first time she had shot a rifle, the moments of exhaustion in winter drills, the pride in leading her first squad through an obstacle course. Each memory now felt like a relic of a past life, a life that seemed impossibly distant in the shadow of her injuries. In the emergency room, surgeons assessed the damage. The diagnosis was devastating. Both legs were irreparably shattered. There was no saving them. Amputation was the only path forward. The words hit Elise like a hammer to the chest. She wanted to scream, to deny reality, to fight against fate with every ounce of strength she had. But even in that moment of despair, a strange clarity emerged. She would survive. How she would fight and live beyond this, she did not yet know, but she refused to surrender to despair. Her squad, once inspired by her confidence and leadership, now faced their own reckoning. Guilt and shame rippled through them. Some whispered apologies, others simply stared in stunned silence. They had witnessed the fall, and yet their inaction had weighed heavily on Elise. She understood fear. The mountain was unforgiving, and hesitation could mean disaster, but the sting of betrayal was real. This moment would haunt her, a reminder that courage was as much about action as it was about endurance. As the pain subsided slightly under anesthesia and medication, Elise's mind turned inward. She reflected on her journey, the years of training, the sacrifices, the relentless drive to be exceptional. Losing her legs did not erase her identity as a soldier. If anything, it challenged her to redefine it. The physical loss was immense, but the fire inside her, the will to overcome, remained intact. She vowed silently, this would not be the end. It would be the beginning of something far greater. The night was long and filled with surgeries, monitors beeping, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Through the haze of painkillers, Elise's thoughts wandered to the future. She imagined walking again, not as she had before, but differently, stronger in ways she could not yet measure. She envisioned leading again, teaching others, pushing boundaries beyond what anyone thought possible. And beneath every vision, a pulse of defiance beat steadily, She would not let this accident define her. She would redefine herself instead. By the time dawn broke over the hospital windows, Elise had begun the slow, painful process of acceptance. Both legs were gone, but the soldier within remained. The battlefield had taken much from her, but it had not claimed her spirit. She lay there, eyes fixed on the ceiling, thinking of her father, her squad, and the mountain that had tried to break her. She felt a surge of determination unlike any before. She would rise, she would fight, and one day she would return, not as the cadet who fell, but as a warrior transformed, unstoppable, and unshakable. The seeds of her comeback had been planted, in blood, pain, and the silence that follows catastrophe. Elise Morgan's story, though fractured, had just begun, and in the quiet, she made a promise to herself. The mountain had taken her legs, but it would never take her will. The hospital room was quiet, except for the low hum of machines monitoring her vitals. White walls, sterile and cold, surrounded Captain Elise Morgan, who lay motionless in the bed, her mind racing faster than her body could move. For the first time in her life, she confronted a reality she had never imagined. Both of her legs were gone. The physical pain was intense, but the mental anguish ran deeper, a relentless storm of disbelief, fear, and sorrow. She stared at the ceiling, willing her mind to focus, trying to find meaning in what seemed meaningless. The initial days were the hardest. Every movement was agony. Every attempt to adjust her position on the bed felt like a war against her own body. Nurses and medics moved around her with practiced efficiency, checking her wounds, changing bandages, administering painkillers. Their voices were calm, professional, but to Elise, they sounded distant, hollow. She had faced extreme physical challenges before: freezing water drills, grueling obstacle courses, sleepless nights under the blazing sun. But nothing had prepared her for the helplessness of immobility. Her hands shook as she touched the stumps of her legs, trying to reconcile her new reality with the soldier she had always been. Her father's words echoed in her mind, the ones that had guided her through every grueling challenge before. A soldier isn't made by limbs, but by will. She clung to them now as if they were a lifeline. But the truth was undeniable. She could no longer walk, run, or climb. Her body, once a finely tuned instrument of strength and endurance, had betrayed her in an instant. A wave of despair crashed over her, sharp and unrelenting. She could hear the whispers of doubt. Who will I be now? Am I still a soldier? Am I still Elise Morgan? The first visitors were her fellow cadets. Their faces carried expressions Elise would never forget: guilt, shock, and an awkward uncertainty that made the room feel smaller. A few tried to smile, offering faint words of encouragement, but their attempts felt clumsy, hollow. They had seen her fall, had watched her struggle, and now they were unsure how to bridge the chasm between the soldier they knew and the wounded woman before them. Some couldn't even meet her eyes, as if acknowledging her new reality might shatter their own sense of control over life and death. Nights were the worst. The room became a prison of silence, punctuated only by the beeping of monitors and the occasional distant footsteps of hospital staff. Elise's mind replayed the accident endlessly: a snap of the rope, the sound of her own scream, the helpless faces of her squad. Every flashback brought a fresh surge of pain and anger. She felt abandoned, not just by the circumstances, but by the very body that had carried her through so many trials. Yet beneath the anger, a spark of defiance persisted. She would not let this define her. She would not let it break her spirit. Physical therapy began slowly. At first, simple tasks were monumental: shifting her weight, sitting upright, moving her arms to grab objects. Every session was a confrontation with her limitations. The therapist, a retired combat medic named Sergeant Reynolds, was firm but encouraging. Pain is temporary. he said, voice steady. What you do with your mind, your determination, that lasts. Elise gritted her teeth, sweat forming on her brow, muscles trembling with effort. She fell countless times, often frustrated to the point of tears. But each failure was a lesson, a reminder that resilience was not innate, it was earned. Relearning independence became an obsession. Elise refused to remain dependent on others. She practiced transfers from bed to wheelchair, developed upper body strength, and mastered basic mobility techniques. Her hands, once tools for climbing in combat, became instruments of adaptation. She found herself measuring small victories, a few inches of self-propelled movement, a steady grip on the wheelchair, the ability to perform tasks alone. Each success was a step toward reclaiming autonomy, a quiet rebellion against the injury that had tried to define her. But the greatest battle was mental. Elise had always drawn strength from her physical abilities, and now that foundation was gone. She struggled with anger, frustration, and fear of the future. She asked herself repeatedly, "Am I still a soldier? Can I ever return to the force? Can I ever lead again?" Some nights, the doubts threatened to suffocate her. She would sit in silence, staring at the ceiling, letting the tears flow freely. Yet even in these darkest moments, the ember of determination refused to die. She made a promise to herself. She would rise, not just physically, but mentally. She would prove that a warrior's strength lay beyond flesh and bone. Her recovery brought unexpected lessons. Elise began to see strength not only in muscle and endurance, but in patience, strategy, and adaptability. She learned to analyze situations from new perspectives, relying on intellect and intuition, where she once relied on speed and mobility. She began imagining ways to return to training, to fight differently, to teach others that limitations are often mental constructs rather than absolute barriers. Each day in the hospital became a battlefield, each exercise a test of willpower. Family visits were bittersweet. Her father sat by her side for hours, recounting stories of his own battles, both in combat and in life. "You've always had the heart of a soldier, Elise," he said gently, gripping her hand. "This isn't the end. It's a new mission. And missions require strategy, patience, and courage, qualities you have in abundance." His words became her anchor. She realized that her identity was not tied to her legs, but to her spirit, her mind, and her courage. The battlefield had changed, but the soldier within had not. As weeks passed, Elise made slow but undeniable progress. She could maneuver in a wheelchair with skill and confidence. She could lift herself from bed to chair, feed herself, and navigate the hospital corridors. Physical strength was returning in her arms, her core, her hands. But more importantly, mental fortitude was solidifying. She was no longer merely surviving, she was preparing to thrive. The hospital room, once a prison, became a training ground for resilience. Every pain, every tear, every failure was a step toward mastery over her new reality. One evening, alone in the dim light of her room, Elise looked at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was different, scarred, altered, but unbroken. She touched the glass, imagining the horizon beyond the hospital walls. The fire in her eyes, once fueled by physical challenge, now burned brighter, powered by sheer determination. She whispered to herself, voice steady and unyielding, "I am still a soldier. I will stand again. I will fight again." That night, for the first time since the accident, hope felt tangible, real. Elise Morgan's journey was far from over, but the foundation had been laid. The soldier who had fallen from the mountain had survived the worst, not only the physical devastation, but the mental and emotional torment that followed. And as she lay in that hospital bed, she began to see a future filled not with limitations, but with possibilities. Her story was no longer about what she had lost. It was about what she would rebuild. The battlefield had changed, the mission had evolved, and Elise was ready. The spark of defiance, once a flicker, now burned like wildfire. Elise knew the road ahead would be arduous, filled with new challenges and obstacles. But she also knew that she possessed the one quality that no injury could take from her, the will to overcome. The soldier without legs was no longer defined by absence, but by indomitable spirit. She would rise, and when she did, the world would see that Special Forces' strength was not measured by limbs, but by heart, mind, and unyielding courage. The sun filtered through the hospital blinds, casting a soft glow on the sterile floor where Captain Elise Morgan faced her most daunting battle yet, not against an enemy in the field, but against the very limitations of her own body. Every morning, she woke with the ache of residual pain, her legs gone, her muscles atrophied, and yet an unyielding fire simmered in her chest. She refused to succumb to despair. The soldier inside her demanded action, demanded progress. She was determined to walk again, not merely to survive, but to redefine the meaning of strength. Her first encounter with the prosthetic legs was humbling. They were cold, mechanical, and unforgiving, designed for function, not comfort. Each fitting felt like a confrontation, metal joints and synthetic sockets against raw, sensitive skin. She struggled to balance, falling repeatedly, hands scraping against polished floors, knuckles bruised, and pride battered. The first attempt to take even a single step seemed impossible. Yet every stumble became a lesson, every failure a marker of incremental progress. For Elise, pain was no longer just a physical sensation. It was a guide, teaching her resilience and patience. Sergeant Reynolds, her retired combat medic and now physical therapy mentor, became her unexpected ally. His voice was firm, unwavering, and demanding, but beneath it lay a deep understanding of what it meant to confront true adversity. Strength, he said one morning, adjusting her prosthetics, isn't measured by what you can endure without falling. It's measured by how many times you rise after you do. Elise absorbed his words like oxygen. Every session was more than exercise. It was war, a deliberate campaign to reclaim mastery over her body and mind. The initial exercises were deceptively simple: standing, shifting weight, taking a single step forward. Yet each motion sent bolts of pain through her stumps, muscles screaming in rebellion. Bloodied, bruised, exhausted, she would collapse, her forehead pressed to the cold floor, tears mingling with sweat. It would have been easy to surrender, to accept defeat, to allow the narrative of tragedy to consume her. But Elise refused. She rose time and time again, guided by sheer willpower, until those first faltering steps transformed into deliberate, controlled movements. Beyond the physical challenge, Elise discovered a profound mental awakening. For the first time, she had to rely not on instinctive mobility, but on strategy, patience, and foresight. Her prosthetic legs required anticipation. Every step had to be calculated, every movement deliberate. She began mapping her environment in her mind, visualizing pathways and obstacles, refining her balance with the precision of a tactician planning a mission. The same mind that had once led her squad through tactical exercises was now being rewired to command her own body. And in this transformation, Elise found empowerment beyond mere mobility. Weeks blurred into months. Elise's progress was measured in inches, in seconds, in subtle improvements that would have gone unnoticed to an outside observer. She celebrated each victory, a successful pivot, a stable descent down the hospital corridor, the first time she ascended a set of stairs without assistance. Each achievement was a reaffirmation of her identity. She was still a soldier. She was still Elise Morgan. Yet, with every triumph, she also confronted the lingering fear of failure. The mountain fall, the shattered legs, the long months in the hospital, they were ghosts that haunted her resolve. She acknowledged them, learned from them, and pressed forward. During her rehabilitation, Elise began to interact with other injured soldiers. Their eyes, wide with grief and frustration, often reflected the same despair she had felt during those initial days. Yet, her determination became infectious. Where some saw limitation, Elise saw opportunity. She shared techniques, offered encouragement, and modeled resilience. Slowly, the hospital transformed from a place of despair into a crucible of transformation. Elise was no longer merely healing herself. She was forging a new paradigm of possibility for those who had been broken, showing them that victory was measured not by what was lost, but by what could be rebuilt. As her strength grew, so did her ambition. Simple walking evolved into running drills, balancing exercises, and adaptive combat simulations. Elise trained with weighted vests to simulate battlefield conditions, mastering agility, speed, and precision. The body that had been shattered was now a tool of adaptation, augmented and sharpened. Every session was grueling. Sweat soaked her clothing, and muscle fatigue threatened collapse. Yet, with each passing day, she became more than she had been before the accident. A warrior not limited by physical constraints, but defined by unyielding spirit. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling session, Elise paused to rest. Her prosthetic legs, once alien and uncomfortable, now felt like extensions of her body. She observed her reflection in the polished window. A warrior tempered by fire, reshaped by pain, unbroken in spirit. Memories of the mountain accident flashed before her, the snap of the rope, the fall, the immediate agony, and she realized that those moments had not destroyed her. They had forged her into something stronger. She whispered softly to herself, conviction steady in her voice. I am not broken. I am reforged. Her rehabilitation also included mental conditioning. Hours were spent visualizing combat scenarios, analyzing tactical strategies, and rehearsing decision-making under pressure. Elise discovered that adaptability was as much a mental skill as a physical one. She could anticipate challenges before they arose, manipulate environments to her advantage, and react with precision. Her injury, once perceived as a crippling limitation, became a catalyst for developing a sharper, more strategic mind. Elise was learning to fight not with legs, but with intellect, courage, and innovation, qualities that would redefine her place in special forces. By the time she was ready to leave the hospital, Elise was transformed. She could walk confidently, sprint short distances, and navigate complex terrains with her prosthetics. She had regained independence, not merely through physical capability, but through mental fortitude, resilience, and adaptive intelligence. The cadet who had fallen from the mountain was no longer the same person. She had become a soldier of a new caliber, one who could defy limitations imposed by circumstance and injury. Elise's journey had revealed a fundamental truth. The essence of a soldier lies not in limbs, but in willpower, intelligence, and courage. The battlefield could take much, even the body itself, but it could not seize the spirit that refused to yield. Her story was no longer about loss. It was about transformation, about the art of turning adversity into power. With prosthetic legs as her allies and determination as her weapon, Elise Morgan was poised to return not just to training, but to a mission far greater than herself. As she stepped outside for the first time, breathing in the crisp air of early morning, she felt the sun on her face, the wind against her cheeks, and the weight of possibility in her heart. The mountain had not defeated her. It had prepared her. The hospital had not confined her. It had reforged her. And the world, unaware of the storm that had reshaped her, was about to witness a soldier who could fight and lead in ways they could never have imagined. Elise Morgan was no longer merely a cadet, nor simply a survivor. She was a warrior reborn, tempered by fire and forged by pain. Her legs were gone, but her mission to rise, to fight, to inspire had only just begun. And in that moment, she realized something profound. She would not just return to the battlefield. She would redefine it. The gates of Fort Bragg loomed ahead, familiar yet changed in Elise Morgan's mind. Months had passed since the mountain accident that had shattered her legs and nearly ended her career. Yet here she was, standing tall figuratively, if not entirely literally, on prosthetic limbs she had learned to wield like extensions of herself. The cadets inside were unaware of what awaited them, and Elise allowed herself a small, private smile. She wasn't the same soldier they had known before. She was stronger, sharper, and armed with an experience that no ordinary training could replicate. Her first steps onto the training ground were cautious, deliberate, yet there was an unmistakable aura about her, a presence that immediately drew attention. Whispers spread like wildfire among the cadets. Some faces expressed skepticism. How could a woman with prosthetic legs hope to compete at the level expected in special forces? Others stared in quiet awe, recognizing the unmistakable determination that radiated from every precise movement. The instructors watched from a distance, curious, cautious, unsure what to make of the cadet who had defied fate itself. The first simulation was a standard combat exercise, a hostage extraction scenario designed to test teamwork, decision-making, and tactical skill. Elise's squad watched nervously as she moved into position, her prosthetic legs glinting in the early morning sun. They expected hesitation, weakness, perhaps even failure. Instead, what they saw was a soldier transformed. Every movement was calculated, precise, efficient. She did not run recklessly. She moved strategically, using her prosthetics to leverage speed, balance, and tactical advantage. The squad quickly realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Elise's mind, sharpened during months of recovery, became her most formidable weapon. While others relied on sheer physicality, she relied on foresight, anticipation, and improvisation. She surveyed the simulated battlefield, assessing threats, calculating angles, and predicting enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. The cadets who once doubted her skills found themselves struggling to keep pace, not because of raw strength, but because her strategy outmaneuvered them at every turn. She demonstrated that leadership was not limited to mobility. It was the art of command, execution, and vision. At one point, the exercise demanded rapid vertical movement, a mock ascent to a second-floor window to reach hostages. Cadets stumbled over obstacles, their inexperience evident, but Elise approached it differently. Her prosthetic limbs gave her the leverage and stability needed to maneuver obstacles in unconventional ways. She reached the window with fluidity and speed that startled observers. It wasn't the power of her legs that mattered. It was the discipline of her mind and the precision of her movements. The demonstration was a revelation. Adaptability could surpass raw strength. Strategy could outweigh brute force. Her squad, initially skeptical, now rallied around her. Confidence replaced uncertainty. The same cadets who had watched her fall months ago now followed her commands without hesitation, inspired by her courage and adaptability. Elise did not merely participate in the simulation. She orchestrated it. Each decision was deliberate, each maneuver a lesson in leadership under adversity. By the time the exercise concluded, it was clear to all present. The soldier who had fallen was no longer defined by injury. She was defined by mastery, resilience, and relentless willpower. Word of Elise's comeback spread quickly across the base. Commanders and instructors convened, marveling at her abilities and determination. Some were hesitant, unwilling to fully acknowledge her capabilities, while others were inspired, recognizing that she represented a new paradigm for Special Forces training. What had once been viewed as a tragic accident had become a story of triumph, a testament to human endurance and the untapped potential within those who refuse to be broken. Elise herself felt a mixture of vindication and humility. She had not returned merely to prove her worth to others. She had returned to prove it to herself. Every step, every maneuver, every decision reinforced a truth she had internalized during the long months of rehabilitation. A soldier's strength was not measured by limbs or physical prowess alone, but by adaptability, intelligence, and indomitable spirit. Her body was now a tool, and her mind was the weapon that ensured victory. The second simulation was even more demanding, involving urban combat and hostage negotiation scenarios. Elise executed each phase with unerring precision, her squad relying on her instincts, decisions, and leadership. When an unexpected complication arose, a simulated enemy ambushed, other cadets panicked. Elise's reaction was immediate. She identified cover points, instructed her squad on positioning, and neutralized threats with calculated moves. Every action reinforced her transformation. She had turned perceived weakness into strategic advantage. By the end of the day, the cadets and instructors alike were awestruck. The girl who had once fallen from the mountain, who had been shattered physically and emotionally, had returned as a force to be reckoned with. She demonstrated a principle that would echo throughout the base. Resilience, strategy, and courage could outweigh the traditional metrics of strength. She had redefined what it meant to be a soldier. After the exercises, Elise took a quiet moment alone on the training ground. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the accident, the months of pain, the relentless therapy, the doubts, the failures, and the triumphs. She understood that her story was no longer about injury. It was about transformation, about turning adversity into an engine of power and inspiration. Her legs, lost to a fall, had been replaced with tools of mobility. Yes, but more importantly, they symbolized her ability to rise above circumstances, to lead, and to fight in ways others could not yet comprehend. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Elise felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had faced the impossible, confronted her limitations, and emerged stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. The cadets who had doubted her now looked to her with admiration and respect. Instructors who had been skeptical now acknowledged that true strength was not measured in legs or muscles alone. And Elise herself had learned the most important lesson of all. The essence of a soldier is not in what the body can do, but in what the mind and spirit can achieve when pushed beyond limits. Her comeback was not complete. There were still challenges ahead, missions to undertake, and battles to fight, but she had crossed a threshold that few ever reached. She had taken tragedy, pain, and loss, and forged them into something extraordinary. The mountain that had broken her, the accident that had shattered her legs, and the hospital that had tested her resolve, had all become part of her arsenal. Elise Morgan had returned to Fort Bragg not just as a cadet, but as a warrior reborn, ready to inspire, to lead, and to redefine the meaning of victory. And in that quiet moment, standing on the field bathed in twilight, Elise understood the truth that had carried her through every trial. Special Forces' strength did not rely solely on limbs, speed, or size. It relied on courage, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will. She had proven, with every calculated step and tactical maneuver, that she could fight, lead, and win against all odds. The comeback that nobody expected was complete, and Elise Morgan had become a legend in her own time, a living testament to resilience and the power of the human spirit. The early morning fog hung low over Fort Bragg as Captain Elise Morgan wheeled herself onto the training field. The once familiar grounds felt different now, not a place of raw endurance alone, but a proving ground for ingenuity, adaptability, and mental fortitude. The cadets watched her approach, some curious, some skeptical, and others openly doubtful. To them, Elise was still the cadet who had fallen from the mountain, the one whose legs had been shattered and lost. But she carried no hesitation in her posture, no sign of limitation. Her presence alone challenged every preconceived notion of strength. Elise had returned not only to train herself, but to demonstrate a truth that had been forged through months of pain, therapy, and relentless practice. A soldier's capability was measured not by the body alone, but by the mind, spirit, and ingenuity. She began her day with the basic drills, running laps adapted for her prosthetics, executing tactical maneuvers with precise movements, and performing combat simulations that tested her coordination and reaction under pressure. Every cadet present watched, incredulous, as she moved fluidly across obstacles that had once seemed insurmountable. It wasn't just speed or technique that captivated onlookers. It was Elise's strategy. She leveraged her prosthetic legs in ways that others could not anticipate, turning potential disadvantage into advantage. On simulated missions, she adjusted angles of approach, anticipated enemy behavior, and maneuvered with calculated precision that left her squad members scrambling to catch up. For many of the younger cadets, this was an awakening. Strength was no longer a measure of brute force, but of creativity, adaptability, and mental acuity. Commanders began taking note. Word of Elise's return had already spread across the base, and her performance on the field was impossible to ignore. Some were cautious, unwilling to acknowledge the full extent of her capabilities, while others recognized that her achievements represented an evolution in special forces training. She was no longer merely a cadet or a veteran returning from injury. She had become a prototype of what was possible when determination met innovation. Through her example, a new understanding of strength began to permeate the ranks. Elise's training sessions became both physical and instructional. She worked closely with cadets, demonstrating that limitation was often mental, not physical. When a trainee struggled to climb a simulated wall, she offered guidance rooted in strategy rather than sheer effort. "It's not just about muscle," she would say, her voice firm yet encouraging. "It's about how you use what you have. Position, timing, and anticipation. That's what wins the fight." The cadets began to understand that their assumptions about her were flawed. She wasn't less because of her prosthetics. She was different, sharper, faster, and smarter. One particularly grueling exercise involved navigating an urban combat course while rescuing simulated hostages under enemy fire. Cadets ran ahead, some stumbling, some faltering under pressure. Elise moved with deliberate intent, calculating every step, every pivot, every tactical decision. Where others relied on speed and raw energy, she relied on intelligence and anticipation. She directed her team with authority, positioning them strategically and neutralizing threats with minimal effort but maximum effect. The instructors, who had long prided themselves on traditional measures of soldiering, watched with astonishment. During breaks, cadets approached her hesitantly. Some offered tentative congratulations. Others asked questions about training techniques, and a few simply observed, absorbing her every movement. Elise was patient. She understood that skepticism and doubt were natural reactions, but she also recognized that her mission extended beyond personal triumph. She was redefining the concept of strength itself, teaching that resilience and adaptability could overcome challenges that once seemed insurmountable. Elise also worked with instructors to develop new adaptive protocols for training wounded or differently abled soldiers. She demonstrated exercises that maximized efficiency, leveraged prosthetics, and encouraged tactical thinking over physical domination. Her input transformed the way training programs were conducted, challenging long-standing traditions and introducing a culture of innovation. The same base that had once witnessed her fall now witnessed her redefine its very ethos. Strength was no longer measured by sheer muscle or unbroken bodies. It was measured by ingenuity, courage, and unyielding will. Yet, despite her success, Elise remained humble. She knew that her journey was ongoing, and that inspiration alone was not enough. Every day, she pushed herself further, increasing distances in running drills, testing her limits in combat scenarios, and refining her ability to think multiple moves ahead of opponents. She became an example of relentless dedication, embodying the principle that victory is won through preparation, focus, and adaptability, not just physical prowess. Her influence extended beyond the field. Veterans, instructors, and even visiting military officials began seeking her perspective on leadership, adaptability, and resilience. Stories of her determination and innovative approach spread through Fort Bragg, inspiring not only cadets, but the entire command structure. Elise had become a symbol, a living demonstration that perceived weakness could be transformed into strength, that adversity could be leveraged into opportunity. The most profound moment came during a complex field exercise simulating a rescue under heavy fire. The cadets who had once doubted her hesitated, under stress, unsure of their capabilities. Elise, moving swiftly and strategically, guided them through the simulation, neutralizing threats and positioning her team for success. By the end, the cadets understood a fundamental truth. It wasn't the body alone that won battles, but the mind and spirit. Elise had taught them to see beyond appearances, to embrace adaptability, and to redefine what it meant to be strong. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elise stood alone on the training field, observing her team as they completed the final drills. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the mountain accident, the months of grueling rehabilitation, and the mental battles that had nearly broken her. Yet, in every scar, in every challenge overcome, she saw the proof of her transformation. She was stronger than she had ever been, not because she had regained her legs, but because she had reclaimed her mind, her spirit, and her purpose. Elise knew that she had achieved more than physical recovery. She had shifted the paradigm of strength, challenging assumptions and inspiring a new generation of soldiers. She had shown that disability did not equate to incapacity, that strategy could triumph where brute force faltered, and that the essence of a warrior lay not in limbs, but in courage, intelligence, and resilience. Her story would echo across the ranks, a testament to the boundless potential of those who refuse to be defined by limitation. As the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Elise turned away from the training field, her mind already planning the next challenge. She had redefined strength, not just for herself, but for everyone who would follow in her footsteps. The soldier who had fallen from the mountain was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a leader, a teacher, and a force of nature whose presence would forever change the way special forces viewed strength. In the quiet of night, she whispered to herself, steady and unwavering, "I am stronger than I ever imagined, and I will never stop proving it." The dawn air at Fort Bragg was crisp and electric, carrying with it the sounds of cadets gearing up for the day's exercises. Today was different. Today, Captain Elise Morgan would not only participate in drills, but teach an entirely new approach, one that would challenge every preconceived notion about ability, strength, and leadership. Cadets, instructors, and even senior officers had gathered on the training grounds, whispers circulating about the cadet who had returned from devastating injury to defy expectations. None of them fully understood what they were about to witness. Elise moved to the center of the field, her prosthetic legs glinting in the morning sun. Her posture was commanding, deliberate, and confident. She looked around at the cadets, many of whom still harbored doubts, some openly, some quietly. The murmurs of "how can she?" floated through the air, but Elise ignored them. She had spent months mastering her body, sharpening her mind, and refining her strategies. Today, she would prove that a soldier's worth was measured not by limbs alone, but by ingenuity, courage, and mental acuity. The first drill was a simulated hostage rescue in an urban combat course. Walls, obstacles, and narrow passages tested balance, speed, and tactical awareness. Cadets with intact limbs hesitated at certain angles, misjudging distances and fumbling over obstacles. Elise, however, moved fluidly. She anticipated each challenge, leveraging her prosthetics to pivot, spring, and navigate obstacles in unconventional ways. Every motion was precise, controlled, and effective. Cadets couldn't help but stare, some with disbelief, others with awe. She had turned her perceived disadvantage into tactical advantage. Focus on leverage, not speed, Elise instructed, her voice steady but commanding. Anticipate, adapt, use what you have to outthink what you don't. Her words were simple, yet the implications were revolutionary. Cadets began adjusting their approach, mirroring her movements, trying to understand the principles behind her unconventional tactics. Elise demonstrated that victory in combat did not always come from brute force. It came from strategy, adaptability, and mental sharpness. As the exercise escalated, cadets faced simulated enemy fire. Many panicked, tripped, or froze, overwhelmed by the chaos. Elise, however, remained calm. She positioned herself and her team with precision, neutralizing threats, guiding cadets to cover, and coordinating movements with uncanny foresight. Her prosthetic legs did not limit her. They enhanced her balance, stability, and ability to maneuver in ways that even fully abled cadets struggled to replicate. By the end of the simulation, every participant understood a new truth. A soldier without legs could outperform many with them if strategy, courage, and training were applied correctly. The next exercise was even more demanding. A coordinated assault requiring swift movement, tactical communication, and improvisation under pressure. Cadets were paired in teams, with Elise acting as leader for one squad. Initially, hesitation and uncertainty threatened the mission. Cadets questioned their ability to keep pace, relying on traditional methods of speed and physicality. Elise seized the opportunity to teach a vital lesson. Strength is not always visible, she reminded them. Special forces don't rely solely on limbs. They rely on mind, timing, and ingenuity. Watch, learn, and adapt. What followed was extraordinary. Elise executed maneuvers with fluid precision, guiding cadets through cover, providing strategic positioning, and anticipating potential threats before they appeared. Her team moved cohesively, responding to her commands with newfound confidence. Cadets who had doubted her abilities before were now inspired, observing that tactical intelligence, leadership, and adaptability could overcome obstacles that raw strength alone could not. Elise had become a living demonstration of innovation, resilience, and the power of human spirit. A particularly intense moment came during a simulated rooftop extraction. Cadets were required to cross narrow beams and ladders while under simulated fire. Many faltered, trembling under fear or misjudging balance. Elise, however, moved with precision, maintaining stability and composure. She guided her team through verbal commands and hand signals, demonstrating techniques that leveraged her prosthetic stability and mechanics. Cadets marveled at how she turned potential weakness into a tactical advantage. For them, it was a lesson that transcended combat training. It was a lesson in life, courage, and human potential. By midday, word of Elise's performance had spread across the base. Senior officers and instructors watched intently, taking notes, observing a reality they could not ignore. The cadet who had fallen from the mountain, who had lost both legs, was now teaching others how to succeed in scenarios many would have assumed required full physical ability. Her story had become living proof that determination, innovation, and courage could surpass conventional limitations. Elise had transformed perception, proving that strength is multidimensional. After lunch, Elise conducted a debriefing session. Cadets gathered around, exhausted but attentive, eager to understand her methods. "Victory is not defined by limbs alone," she explained. "It's defined by anticipation, adaptability, and relentless will. Special forces don't need legs to win a fight. They need brains, strategy, and courage. Your body is a tool, but your mind and spirit are your weapons." Her words resonated deeply, striking a chord with both cadets and instructors. The lessons she imparted would influence their training long after today. The afternoon brought the final, climactic exercise, a full-scale battlefield simulation with multiple objectives, hostile forces, and environmental challenges. Cadets moved in teams, but it quickly became clear that Elise's squad was the most coordinated. She guided them with a combination of verbal commands, gestures, and subtle signals. Where others relied on speed, her team relied on calculated movement. Where others reacted impulsively, they anticipated. By the end of the exercise, her squad had completed objectives faster, more efficiently, and with fewer errors than any other team. The conclusion was undeniable. Skill, strategy, and adaptability could overcome any physical limitation. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the field, Elise stood tall on her prosthetics, surveying the cadets and instructors around her. Silence hung in the air, heavy with awe and respect. The message was clear. The mountain fall, the shattered legs, and months of pain had not defined her. She had redefined what it meant to be a soldier. Special forces don't need legs to win a fight. They need determination, intellect, courage, and the willingness to adapt when faced with the impossible. Cadets approached her with newfound respect, some shaking her hand, others simply standing in quiet admiration. Senior officers nodded solemnly, acknowledging that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Elise had not only returned from devastation, but had transformed the base's understanding of ability, strength, and leadership. Her journey had inspired everyone who had doubted the limits of human potential, proving that adversity could be turned into an advantage when met with unbreakable will. That night, Elise returned to her quarters, exhausted but elated. She reflected on the day's events, remembering the months of rehabilitation, the pain, and the countless failures she had endured. Each moment of struggle had led to this culmination, a demonstration that strength is not only physical, but mental, strategic, and spiritual. The cadet who had once been broken had become a teacher, a leader, and a living testament to the human capacity to overcome, adapt, and triumph. Elise's story would spread, whispered in training rooms, shared in classrooms, and celebrated as an example of extraordinary resilience. She had proven that Special Forces excellence was not about the body alone, but about courage, intellect, and the refusal to yield. The legacy she had forged that day would inspire generations, showing that no obstacle, not even the loss of one's legs, could diminish the spirit of a warrior. And as she gazed out at the fading light over Fort Bragg, Elise understood something profound. She had not only returned to the field, but she had reshaped it. Special forces don't need legs to win a fight. They need heart, mind, and unyielding determination. And Elise Morgan had embodied every ounce of that truth, forever leaving her mark on the soldiers who would follow. The dawn broke over Fort Bragg with a golden light that seemed to reflect the culmination of months of struggle, determination, and triumph. Captain Elise Morgan stood on the training field, her prosthetic legs firmly planted, her gaze steady, and her posture exuding an authority born of experience and perseverance. Today was not just another training day. It was the day her story would inspire an entire generation of soldiers. A day where her journey from shattered cadet to transformative leader would be celebrated in every stride she took. The cadets gathered around, whispers of awe and anticipation spreading like wildfire. They had watched her climb, maneuver, and lead in scenarios that challenged every traditional notion of capability. Today, however, Elise was leading a comprehensive field exercise designed to test the cadets in ways they had never experienced before. Her mission was clear: to demonstrate that true strength lay not in limbs, but in intellect, courage, and adaptability. The exercise began with a simulated combat scenario. Explosions roared in the distance, smoke filled the air, and cadets moved cautiously, uncertain of their footing. Elise commanded her team with precision, her prosthetic legs giving her stability and allowing movements that balanced speed with control. Each order was deliberate, each step calculated. Her cadets, inspired by her past demonstrations, executed her strategy flawlessly, adapting to obstacles with confidence. A particularly challenging segment involved a narrow bridge spanning a simulated canyon. Cadets hesitated, some paralyzed by fear, imagining the consequences of missteps. Elise approached first, demonstrating technique, balance, and strategic movement. She guided the team across, leveraging her prosthetics to maintain stability where many would have faltered. Her cadets followed, inspired by her poise and control, understanding that courage is often a matter of mindset rather than physicality. During a simulated hostage rescue, Elise demonstrated another principle that had become central to her teaching: adaptability under pressure. When an unexpected complication arose, a secondary threat appearing in their path, other cadets froze. Elise reacted instantly, calculating angles, positioning her team, and neutralizing the threat with a combination of intelligence and precision. Observers were astounded. The same cadet who had once fallen from a mountain now orchestrated complex operations with ease, proving that disability could not diminish tactical acumen. The exercise continued with simulated urban combat, requiring rapid adaptation, clear communication, and decisive leadership. Cadets who had once doubted Elise's abilities now followed her commands without hesitation. She became more than a teacher. She became a symbol. Every movement, every instruction reinforced the lesson she had fought to learn herself. Success is determined not by the body alone, but by the mind, spirit, and the courage to overcome limitations. By midday, senior officers and instructors had gathered to witness the full scope of her demonstration. They watched in silence as Elise led her team through a series of complex scenarios: climbing, tactical maneuvers, ambush simulations, and rescue operations. Each task showcased her remarkable adaptation and strategic brilliance. What stood out most was not the physical skill, but the mental acuity, the foresight, and the ability to inspire and command under pressure. After completing the field exercises, Elise gathered her cadets for a debrief. She spoke with quiet authority, her voice carrying a weight of experience and unshakable resolve. "Today, you've seen that limitation is not a measure of strength," she began. "Your mind, your strategy, your courage, these are the tools that make you effective. Special forces don't rely solely on limbs. They rely on adaptability, intelligence, and willpower. What you saw today is the truth. A soldier can overcome anything if they refuse to surrender to circumstance." Her words resonated deeply. Cadets who had been skeptical or intimidated by her story now understood the depth of her lesson. They realized that Elise's journey was more than personal triumph. It was a blueprint for resilience, innovation, and leadership. Every action she had taken on the field, every command she had issued, every tactical choice she had made became a testament to the power of determination. As the day progressed, Elise participated in one final exercise designed to cement the lesson. A full-scale simulated battle with multiple objectives and unpredictable threats required her cadets to integrate everything they had learned from her demonstrations. Elise led from the front, adapting to challenges in real time, coordinating movements, and ensuring the success of her team. Observers noted the transformation in the cadets. Fear and doubt had been replaced with confidence, initiative, and a renewed understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. By the time the exercise concluded, the field was quiet, the air still thick with the residue of simulated conflict. Cadets, instructors, and officers alike stood in awe, recognizing that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Elise had not just returned to Fort Bragg, she had transformed it. She had shown that strength was not defined by the body alone, but by resilience, courage, and the refusal to be limited by circumstance. That evening, as the sun set over the base, Elise walked through the training grounds alone. Her prosthetic legs moved smoothly beneath her, a testament to months of pain, struggle, and relentless effort. She reflected on her journey, the mountain that had tried to break her, the surgeries, the months of rehabilitation, and the countless hours of mental and physical training. Each challenge had been a crucible, shaping her into the soldier she had become. She realized that her journey had always been about more than herself. It had been about proving what was possible for all soldiers facing adversity. In the quiet of her quarters, Elise documented her experiences, creating notes and strategies that would inform future training programs for injured or differently abled soldiers. She had become an advocate, a teacher, and a mentor, ensuring that her lessons extended far beyond her personal story. Her mission was no longer simply to survive or return to the field. It was to inspire, guide, and redefine the boundaries of what soldiers could achieve. News of Elise's accomplishments spread throughout military circles. Veterans, officers, and trainees alike began to reference her as an example of extraordinary resilience. Her story became a benchmark, illustrating that adversity could be transformed into strength, and that leadership and strategy could triumph where raw physicality might fail. Elise's journey from shattered cadet to transformative leader had created a legacy that would endure, inspiring countless soldiers to overcome limitations and redefine what it meant to be a warrior. Years later, cadets would still speak of the day Elise Morgan returned to Fort Bragg and taught them that special forces don't need legs to win a fight. They would recount how she turned obstacles into opportunities, how she led with courage and intelligence, and how she transformed skepticism into belief. Her name became synonymous with resilience, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of excellence, proving that the human spirit could rise above the most devastating challenges. Elise herself knew that her journey was not over. There would always be new challenges, missions, and tests of strength. But she also knew that she had achieved something far greater than individual triumph. She had reshaped the definition of strength, inspired a generation, and left a legacy that would echo across training grounds and battlefields alike. She had proven that even in the face of devastating loss, victory was possible, not just through limbs or physical skill, but through heart, mind, and will. As the night settled over Fort Bragg, Elise looked toward the horizon. The stars shone brightly, as if illuminating the path she had forged. She whispered to herself, steady and unwavering, "The mountain did not break me. The battle ahead is mine to define. Special forces don't need legs to win a fight, and I will always prove it." Captain Elise Morgan had completed her journey from tragedy to triumph, from despair to inspiration. Her story would live on, a testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit, the power of will, and the enduring truth that strength is measured not by what you have, but by how far you are willing to rise.